"Your son is still alive." The words were barely louder than a breath. Yet they cut through the noise of the ballroom so cleanly that, for a moment, it felt as if the entire mansion had stopped breathing. Richard Whitmore's fingers loosened. An old photograph slipped from his hand and fluttered toward the marble floor. Somewhere behind him, a crystal glass struck a tray with a sharp metallic click. A woman gasped. The little black girl standing beside him did not move. She simply looked up at the billionaire and whispered one more thing. "I saw him 3 nights ago." 8 hours earlier, Whitmore Manor had looked exactly the way people expected a billionaire's mansion to look before a charity gala. Fresh flowers lined the staircase. Caterers moved through the hall carrying silver trays. A string quartet rehearsed beneath a ceiling painted nearly a century ago. Every detail had been arranged for perfection, but perfection had a strange habit of hiding cracks. Maya Brooks noticed one before anyone else did. She was helping her mother in the service corridor behind the ballroom when she saw it. A photograph sitting alone on a side table. It didn't belong there. Everything else in the mansion looked expensive and deliberate. The photograph looked worn. The edges were bent. One corner had been repaired with yellowing tape. Someone had handled it too many times. Maya paused with a stack of folded napkins in her arms. "Maya," her mother called softly. "Keep moving, baby."
"Sorry, Mama."
She continued walking, but she couldn't stop thinking about the picture. Tanya Brooks worked 3 jobs. One of them happened to be cleaning part of Whitmore Manor twice a week. She had warned Maya to stay invisible tonight. Rich people noticed mistakes before they noticed people. Maya understood that. She always did. Yet as the afternoon slipped toward evening, something continued bothering her. Not the photograph itself. The necklace in it. By 6 o'clock, guests began arriving. Men in tailored tuxedos. Women wearing diamonds that caught the chandelier light like tiny stars. Maya stood near the rear service entrance carrying a tray of sparkling water when she finally saw Richard.
"Whitmore arrive."
The billionaire looked exactly like the magazines described him. Tall, silver-haired, controlled. The kind of man who seemed impossible to surprise. But Maya noticed something else. Before greeting a single guest, Richard stopped at that same table. He picked up the old photograph. And for a few seconds, the expression on his face changed. The loneliness was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Yet Maya saw it. The way only children sometimes notice things adults worked hard to hide. "Who's that?" she asked quietly later. One of the older staff members glanced toward the picture. "His son." Maya waited. The woman lowered her voice. "Died years ago." Maya felt something cold move through her chest. Because 3 nights earlier, she had sat on a hard plastic bench inside a downtown bus terminal, sharing a bag of crackers with a boy in a gray hoodie. A boy who had seemed exhausted and watchful at the same time. A boy who kept checking the entrance every few minutes. A boy wearing that exact silver anchor necklace. As the gala officially began, Maya spotted Richard again near the grand staircase. This time he was holding the photograph in his hand while speaking with donors. The ballroom glowed with gold light. Laughter echoed across the room. No one was looking at her. No one expected a cleaning lady's daughter to walk into the center of a billionaire's evening. Maya set down her tray. Her heartbeat quickened. Then she crossed the room. She stopped beside Richard Whitmore and gently tugged his sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed at the photograph. "Your son is still alive," she whispered. The photograph slipped from his hand. And as it struck the marble floor, Maya's eyes landed on something she hadn't noticed before. Written faintly on the back of the photograph, almost erased by time, were 3 words that made her blood run cold. Not missing, protected, hidden. Richard Whitmore did not bend to pick up the photograph immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Maya, as if the little girl had spoken in a language he almost recognized but could not quite understand. Around them, the gala continued moving for a few awkward seconds. A waiter crossed the ballroom carrying champagne. The quartet kept playing. A donor laughed too loudly at a joke that suddenly wasn't funny anymore. Then the room began noticing something was wrong. Richard finally lowered himself and picked up the photograph from the marble floor. His fingers paused briefly over the faded words on the back. Not missing, protected, hidden. He had seen those words before. Years ago, or thought he had. The memory vanished before he could grab hold of it. "What did you say your name was?" he asked quietly. "Maya. How old are you?" 9. Richard nodded once. Not because her age mattered, because he needed a second to think. Behind him, Evelyn Whitmore stepped forward with the kind of calm that looked practiced. "Richard," she said gently, almost smiling. "She's a child." The sentence sounded harmless, concerned even. Yet Maya noticed something strange. Evelyn wasn't looking at Richard. She was looking at the photograph. "Maya," Evelyn continued, lowering herself slightly as though speaking to a nervous student. "Do you know how many children wear anchor necklaces?" Maya didn't answer. "A lot," Evelyn supplied for her. "It's a common design." Maya looked up. "Maybe. Then perhaps you saw someone who looked similar." "Maybe." Evelyn's smile relaxed a little. Then Maya added, "But he knew your name." The smile disappeared. It happened so fast most adults would have missed it. Maya didn't. Richard didn't miss it either. Silence settled briefly between them. Somewhere near the kitchen entrance, a spoon touched the inside of a glass with a soft metallic click. The sound felt strangely loud. Richard folded the photograph and slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. "What exactly did this boy say?" he asked. Maya hesitated. Not because she was afraid, because she remembered. 3 nights earlier. The cold fluorescent lights of the downtown bus terminal. The boy in the gray hoodie sitting alone beneath a flickering television screen. The silver anchor necklace resting against his chest. "He asked me what time it was," Maya said softly. "That's all," Richard asked. At first, Richard waited. Maya swallowed. Then somebody walked through the station. She pointed toward the ballroom doors as if the memory were standing there. A woman. Evelyn's hand tightened around her champagne glass. Barely, but Richard saw it. "And," Maya continued, "the boy hid." No one spoke. Richard studied her face carefully. Children invented stories. Adults knew that. But children also remembered details that adults ignored. "Why would he hide?" Richard asked. Maya shrugged. "I asked him that." "What did he say?" She looked down briefly at her shoes. "He said," her voice lowered, "if anyone asks, don't tell them you saw me." Richard felt something shift inside him. Not belief. Not yet. Something smaller. A splinter of doubt lodged where certainty used to live. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He stepped aside and glanced at the screen. A text from Caleb Ross, his longtime attorney. Nothing unusual. Until Richard accidentally opened an old conversation thread attached to a legal archive from 8 years ago. A file name flashed for half a second before disappearing beneath newer messages. No _case_final. Richard froze. Because according to every official record, the file had never been called that. It had been renamed after Noah's death. Years ago. Yet somehow, on a backup server timestamped only 4 months earlier, the original name was still active. And someone had accessed it 17 times in the last 30 days. Richard kept the phone low in his hand, the glow of the screen hidden against the dark fabric of his suit jacket. To anyone watching, he looked calm, perhaps mildly distracted by an ordinary message during an expensive evening. Only Maya was close enough to see that his thumb had stopped moving. His eyes had settled on the same line as if it were a crack in the floor. Accessed 17 times in the last 30 days. Evelyn touched his arm lightly. "Richard, the governor is waiting near the south room. We shouldn't let this become uncomfortable." Her voice was warm, almost kind, but her fingers pressed too firmly against his sleeve, guiding him away from Maya, away from the photograph, away from the question he had not yet asked out loud. Richard looked at the little girl again. "You said he handed you something?" Maya's shoulders tightened. "I didn't say that yet." Evelyn turned sharply. "Richard, enough." He did not raise his voice. "Maya." The girl glanced toward her mother, who stood frozen near the service doors with a stack of linen napkins clutched against her chest. Tanya's eyes pleaded with her to be careful. Maya understood. Careful was how poor people survived rooms like this. But careful had never saved the boy at the bus station. Maya reached into the inside pocket of her worn denim jacket and pulled out a small metal locker key attached to a faded paper tag. The tag had been folded so many times the edges looked soft as cloth. She held it close to her chest instead of handing it over. "He gave me this before he ran." Richard looked at it without touching it. "Where?" "Downtown terminal. Locker C18. Evelyn gave a small laugh, but it came half a second too late. "Children pick up things all the time. That could belong to anyone." Maya looked straight at her. "Then why did he say, 'If something happens to me, don't give it to a woman in pearls'?" The ballroom seemed to shrink around them. Evelyn wore pearls. 3 perfect strands resting against the black silk of her dress. Richard's eyes dropped to them, then rose again. Evelyn's smile held, but the skin near her mouth tightened. "That is an absurd coincidence." "I didn't know what pearls were called," Maya said. He pointed to his neck when he said it. Richard heard something then, not in her words, in the precision of them. A child inventing a lie usually reached for drama. Maya kept reaching for small things. A bench under a flickering television. A gray hoodie. A necklace. A woman. Pearls. He extended his hand, palm open. "May I see it?" Maya stepped back once. "Not far. Just enough." "No, sir." A murmur moved through the guests. Richard did not look offended. If anything, he looked more awake. "Why not?" "Because grown-ups keep asking me to give things away before they tell me why they want them." Tanya made a broken sound near the service doors. Evelyn's face changed again, barely. Richard lowered his hand. "Fair." Maya swallowed, then turned the key slightly so he could read the tag without taking it. C18. Below that, written in blue ink, was a date. March 14th. Richard's breath paused. Noah had disappeared on March 14th 8 years ago. Evelyn reached suddenly for the key. Not violently, not enough to be called force. Just a smooth, polished movement disguised as concern. Maya closed her fist before Evelyn's fingers touched metal. Richard saw it. So did the lawyer standing 20 feet away. And for the first time that night, the billionaire stepped between the rich woman and the poor little girl. "No one takes that key," he said. Evelyn's eyes flashed, then softened too quickly. "I was only trying to help." Richard looked down at Maya's closed fist. A tiny strip of paper stuck out from beneath her fingers, hidden behind the key tag. He had not noticed it before. Maya had. She slowly unfolded it. On the back, in shaky handwriting that looked nothing like a child's, were 4 words and a phone number. "Call him if I vanish." The paper felt impossibly light in Maya's hand. 4 words. 1 phone number. Yet somehow the entire ballroom seemed to lean toward it. Richard reached for his phone. "Don't call it here," Evelyn said immediately. Her tone remained smooth, professional, almost protective. "If this is connected to an old custody matter or a fraud attempt, we should verify everything through legal channels first." Several board members nearby nodded. It sounded reasonable, responsible even. Richard looked at the number again but did not dial. "Perhaps she's right," said Martin Hale, the family's senior attorney, stepping forward from the crowd. His silver cufflinks flashed beneath the chandelier light. "Mr. Whitmore, if this becomes public and turns out to be fabricated, the consequences could be significant." Maya noticed something strange. Nobody was asking whether the boy was alive. They were discussing paperwork, reputation, procedure, risk. The little girl stood in the middle of people worth hundreds of millions of dollars and suddenly felt smaller than she had all night. The ballroom stretched around her like another world. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble, paintings worth more than her mother's apartment building. Men who controlled, companies, women whose names appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. And in the middle of it all stood a 9-year-old girl holding a worn key and a folded note. "Mama," Tanya whispered from behind her. Fear trembled through her voice. Not fear of the rich. Fear of losing work. Losing rent money. Losing stability. Maya understood. She always did. Martin offered a patient smile. The kind adults used when speaking to children they had already dismissed. Maya, you've been very helpful. Why don't you give the key to Mr. Whitmore's security team? They'll take it from here.
No.
The answer arrived quietly. The smile remained on Martin's face. Why not? Maya looked at the key. Because he didn't give it to security. A few people exchanged glances. Martin chuckled softly. Sweetheart, that's not really your responsibility. Maya lifted her eyes. Then why did he trust me instead of them? The question landed harder than anyone expected. Nobody answered immediately. Richard didn't either. For the first time all evening, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man listening. Evelyn stepped closer. Maya, she said gently. Sometimes children get pulled into situations they don't fully understand. Maya nodded once. Maybe. And sometimes adults need to handle complicated matters. Maybe. Evelyn smiled. Then let's do that. She extended her hand toward the key. Maya didn't move. The silence became uncomfortable. Across the room, the quartet had stopped playing. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, a television murmured faintly from a staff lounge. A weather report. Rain moving in from the west. For a brief second, the ordinary sound softened the tension. Then Martin's phone vibrated. He glanced down. So did Maya. She wasn't trying to read it. She simply noticed details. Children often did. The notification disappeared almost immediately, but not before she saw the first line. Locker C, 18 accessed. Martin's thumb moved fast, closing the message. Too fast. Richard noticed. Something wrong. Martin slipped the phone into his pocket. Nothing important. Maya remembered the exact expression on the boy's face at the bus station when he saw someone approaching. The same quick look. The same calculation. The same desire to hide information before anyone asked questions. Richard folded his arms. Who sent the message? Martin's smile returned. Routine security update. The answer sounded polished, practiced, finished. The kind of answer that usually ended conversations. Richard nodded slowly.
No argument. No accusation.
Yet Maya saw something shift behind his eyes. Martin seemed satisfied. Evelyn seemed relieved. Around them, the room began breathing again. People resumed quiet conversations. Waiters moved. Glasses clinked. The wealthy world appeared to have regained control. Then Maya looked down at the folded note in her hand one more time. Beneath the phone number, almost hidden by a crease she hadn't noticed before, was a tiny handwritten addition. 3 letters. C18. Followed by 2 words that made her stomach tighten. Not empty. Not empty. Maya read the words twice before looking up. The ballroom no longer mattered. The donors, the chandeliers, the orchestra packing away their instruments. None of it felt real compared to the tiny note in her hand. Richard saw the change in her face immediately. What is it? Maya hesitated. Not because she wanted attention. Because she had already learned that every time she revealed something, another adult tried to take it away. Slowly, she handed him the note. Richard unfolded it beneath the warm glow of a wall sconce. The paper smelled faintly of rain and old cardboard. Someone had carried it for a long time. His eyes found the new words. Not empty. A strange silence settled over him. Locker C18, he murmured. Not empty. Martin stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, if there's property inside, station security can retrieve it tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word felt oddly convenient. Richard folded the note and slipped it into his pocket beside the photograph.
No.
The answer came softly. We'll go tonight. For the first time, Martin looked uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then the expression vanished. But Maya saw it. Richard saw it too. Less than an hour later, the gala continued without them. Rain tapped gently against the windshield of the black SUV as it moved through downtown streets. Caleb Ross sat in the front passenger seat. Tanya sat beside Maya in the rear, hands folded tightly together. Nobody spoke much. The city lights slid across the glass in long streaks of gold and white. When they arrived at the bus terminal, the building looked tired. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A vending machine hummed near the entrance. Somewhere down the corridor, a television played a late-night weather report. Nobody seemed to be watching. Locker C-18 sat near the back wall. Small, gray, ordinary. Richard stared at it longer than necessary. 8 years of certainty had taught him that Noah was gone. Yet here he stood at nearly midnight, holding a key given to a little girl by a boy who shouldn't exist. Maya stepped forward. "I kept it safe." Richard looked at her. "I know." She inserted the key. The lock clicked open. Inside sat 3 things: an old flip phone, a folded road map, and a worn spiral notebook. No money.
No valuables. No explanation.
Just the kind of object someone carried when they expected to leave quickly. Richard reached for the notebook first. The cover was bent. Water stains marked the edges. He opened it carefully. The first few pages contained addresses. Different cities. Different dates. Cincinnati. Toledo. Columbus. Indianapolis. Always moving. Always temporary. Then he turned another page. His hand stopped. Written in uneven handwriting were 3 words. "Maybe Dad forgot." Richard said nothing. He continued reading. "Maybe Dad believed them." Another page. "Maybe Dad didn't want me." The fluorescent lights seemed colder now. Maya watched his face. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. That somehow felt worse. Caleb quietly looked away. Tanya lowered her eyes. Richard turned page after page. Notes, thoughts, fragments. The voice of a boy growing older while trying to understand why nobody came. Then a loose item slipped free from the notebook and landed on the floor. A receipt. Maya picked it up before anyone else could. "Wait." She handed it directly to Richard. The paper was faded but readable. A diner receipt from 3 months earlier. 2 meals. 2 coffees. 1 adult. 1 child. Richard frowned. Then froze. Printed near the bottom was a credit card ending in 4 digits he recognized instantly. 1174. He had approved that card himself years ago. It belonged to the Whitmore Family Trust. The account managed exclusively by Evelyn Whitmore. Richard stared at the receipt for a very long time. The diner was less than 30 miles from the estate. Noah had been close. Close enough to drive to in under an hour. Close enough that someone could have found him. Or visited him. Slowly, Richard looked down at the receipt again. Then at the date. Then at the card number. And for the first time that night, he began wondering whether the person who had protected his family for years might also be the person who had been hiding the truth. Richard folded the receipt once and slid it carefully into the notebook. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The old bus terminal seemed to grow quieter around them. Somewhere near the entrance, a janitor pushed a mop bucket across the tile floor. The wheels squeaked rhythmically, fading down the corridor. Richard closed the notebook. "Caleb." His voice remained calm. "Yes, sir. I want copies of every transaction connected to the Whitmore Family Trust for the last 8 years. Caleb did not ask why. "Tonight. Tonight." Richard looked at the flip phone resting inside the locker. "And I want everything connected to that account ending in 1174. Caleb nodded once. "Understood." The billionaire picked up the phone. It felt surprisingly light. The plastic was scratched. The battery cover had been taped back on at some point. The kind of phone nobody wealthy would carry anymore. Yet someone had protected it long enough to hide it in a locker. He pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead. "Can we charge it?" Maya asked. Richard glanced at her. "Maybe." She hesitated. "If it belongs to him, maybe he wanted somebody to see it." Richard didn't answer immediately. He simply slipped the phone into his coat pocket. The drive back to the estate felt different. Colder. The city lights no longer looked ordinary. Every traffic light seemed to hold a question. Every passing car seemed to carry a possibility. When they reached Whitmore Manor, most of the guests had gone home. The mansion felt hollow now. Too large. Too quiet. Tanya sat with Maya in a small staff kitchen near the rear wing while Richard and Caleb disappeared into the library. A single lamp glowed above the counter. Rain tapped softly against the dark window over the sink. Someone had left a bowl of fruit beside an unplugged coffee machine. For the first time all night, Maya looked tired. Tanya touched her daughter's hair gently. "You don't have to keep doing this." Maya stared into a glass of milk she hadn't touched. "I'm not doing it for him." Then for who? Maya thought about the boy at the bus station. The way he kept watching the doors. The way he flinched whenever footsteps came too close. For the boy. Tanya swallowed hard. Maya added quietly. And because nobody believed him. In the library across the mansion, Caleb placed a stack of digital records on the large oak desk. Richard sat alone beneath the soft green glow of an antique reading lamp. Transaction after transaction filled the screen. Utility bills, property taxes, maintenance payments, trust distributions. Everything appeared normal. Until it didn't. Richard stopped scrolling. A series of monthly payments appeared under a shell organization called Northlake Youth Services. Small amounts. Easy to overlook. Consistent for 8 years. "Pull corporate registration records," he said. Caleb typed for a moment, then stopped. "That's strange." "What?" Caleb turned the monitor slightly. "The organization doesn't exist anymore." Richard leaned forward. "When did it close?" Caleb looked again. "It never existed." The room went still. Richard stared at the screen. Someone had been moving money through a charity that wasn't real. The payments traced back to the same trust account Evelyn controlled. His eyes drifted toward an older folder Caleb had opened beside the financial records.
Personnel archive.
8 years old. Richard almost ignored it. Then one name caught his attention. Harold Mercer, former head of corporate security. Deceased. 7 years ago. Richard remembered attending the funeral. Remembered standing beside Evelyn afterward while she assured him everything connected. To Noah's case had finally been settled. He opened Harold's personnel file. Near the bottom sat a scanned resignation letter submitted 6 weeks before his reported death. Richard read it once. Then again. His pulse slowed instead of quickened. That was always worse. Because anger faded. Certainty sharpened. The final line of the letter read, "I can no longer participate in decisions regarding the child." Richard stared at those words for a very long time. Then he slowly closed the file. For 8 years he had believed Harold Mercer abandoned the family after Noah died. Tonight he realized something far more dangerous. Harold Mercer had not been leaving because Noah was gone. He had been leaving because Noah was still alive. The library remained quiet long after Caleb finished reading the resignation letter. Rain traced slow lines down the tall windows overlooking the dark lawn. Richard stood beside the desk, one hand resting lightly on the back of a leather chair. His expression had become difficult to read. That usually meant he had made a decision. "Call Evelyn," he said. Caleb looked up. "Now? Now?" He checked his watch. Nearly 1 in the morning. "Tell her I need help understanding something." Caleb understood immediately. Not a confrontation. A test. 30 minutes later, Evelyn entered the library wrapped in a cashmere coat. She looked tired in the precise way wealthy people often did, carefully arranged, never truly vulnerable. Her eyes moved first to Richard, then to Caleb, then briefly to Maya sitting quietly beside her mother near the fireplace. The glance lasted less than a second. Maya noticed anyway. Evelyn smiled. "Richard, it's after midnight. What's so urgent?" Richard gestured toward a chair. "Sit down." His tone remained perfectly calm. That seemed to make Evelyn more nervous than anger would have. She sat. Richard slid a thin folder across the desk. "Do you remember Northlake Youth Services?" Evelyn barely glanced at it. "A charity partnership years ago." "Really?" "Yes." Her answer arrived immediately. Too immediately. Richard nodded. "Interesting." He opened the folder. Because according to the state records, it never existed. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. Just a fraction. Then she recovered. There were dozens of partnerships. Perhaps the name changed. Richard didn't argue. He simply accepted the answer and moved to the next question. Do you remember Harold Mercer? Of course. You told me he left because he couldn't handle Noah's death. Evelyn folded her hands together. That's what everyone believed. Richard studied her quietly. Across the room, an old grandfather clock ticked. The sound seemed louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Then Maya spoke. That's not what the boy said. Every adult in the room looked toward her. Evelyn's smile returned. Polite, controlled. Maya, sweetheart, we don't even know who this boy is. Maya nodded. I know. Then why trust him? Maya looked down at the notebook resting on her lap. Because he knew something. Evelyn crossed one leg over the other. What? Maya answered without looking up. He knew the song. The room went still. Richard frowned. What song? Maya finally lifted her eyes. The one from the music box. Evelyn blinked. Once. What music box? Maya pointed toward a shelf across the library. A small silver music box sat between framed photographs. Richard stared at it. Noah's music box. The one he'd received for his 5th birthday. Maya's voice remained soft. The boy at the station was humming it. Nobody spoke. Richard slowly turned toward Evelyn. That melody was never public. Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Children hear things. They remember fragments. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Maybe. He walked to the shelf and picked up the music box. Then he placed it in the center of the desk. Between himself and Evelyn. Between the past and the present. Hum it. Evelyn stared at him. What? The melody. His voice remained calm. You said children remember fragments. Hum it. For a moment she didn't move. The little silver box sat untouched between them. A simple object. Yet somehow it felt heavier than the folders, the receipts, the trust records, and the resignation letter combined. Near the desk, Caleb's phone vibrated once. Nobody reached for it. The screen lit. Briefly. Then darkened again. Richard never looked away from Evelyn. Seconds passed. Then more. Finally Evelyn smiled. I haven't heard it in years. Maya lowered her eyes. She remembered exactly what the boy had said at the bus station. Not the whole sentence. Just one detail. One simple thing adults would have ignored. That's funny, Maya said quietly. Because he told me you used to sing it to him. The silence that followed felt different. Colder. And for the first time all night, Evelyn stopped looking at Maya like a child and started looking at her like a threat. But when Evelyn lifted her gaze again, Richard Whitmore was no longer standing on the other side of the room. He was standing beside the little girl. For several seconds, nobody moved. The music box sat between them. The rain pressed softly against the library windows. Somewhere deep inside the mansion, a refrigerator motor hummed and then fell silent again. Richard's eyes never left Evelyn. She was still composed, still elegant, still sitting perfectly straight in the leather chair. But something had changed. Not panic. Not yet. Calculation. The kind that appeared when a person realized the conversation had stopped following the path they expected. Then Caleb's phone vibrated again. This time he looked at it. His expression hardened almost immediately. Richard. Caleb rarely used his first name. Richard noticed. So did Evelyn. What is it? Caleb stepped closer and turned the screen around. The recovery team finished extracting data from the flip phone. Nobody spoke. Caleb continued. There was only one protected file. Richard held out his hand. Caleb gave him the phone. A video file sat on the screen. No title. No date. Just a sequence of numbers. Maya looked at it and felt a chill run through her. She recognized the gray hoodie hanging on a chair in the thumbnail image. Richard pressed play. The recording began shakily. The camera pointed toward a small room. Cheap walls. A folding table. Fluorescent lights. Noah appeared first. Younger than he would be now. Older than the boy in the photograph. He looked directly into the camera. If you're seeing this, his voice cracked. He swallowed. Something happened. Richard froze. Noah shifted aside. Another figure entered the frame. A man in a security uniform. Older. Tired. Richard immediately recognized him. Harold Mercer, the former head of security. The man everyone believed had abandoned the family before his death. Harold looked into the camera. This recording is for Richard Whitmore. The room seemed to grow colder. Harold continued. Your son was never dead. Nobody breathed. Not Caleb. Not Tanya. Not Maya. Not even Evelyn. Harold reached across the table and slid several documents into view. Birth records. Custody filings. Trust documents. Then another voice entered the recording. Not visible. Only audible. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. Evelyn's face lost color before the first full sentence finished. Richard cannot know where the boy is. The voice was unmistakable. The library fell completely silent. The recording continued. Another voice joined. An attorney. Then another. A trustee. They discussed guardianship transfers, asset protection, public scandal, elections for the corporate board. Words that sounded professional until placed beside a child sitting quietly at a folding table. Noah lowered his head while adults discussed his future as if he weren't in the room. Maya looked toward Richard. His face had gone pale. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just the slow draining of certainty from a man whose entire world had begun shifting beneath him. Then the final blow arrived. Harold looked directly into the camera again. Richard, he said, if you're hearing this, I failed. I couldn't stop them. But your son never stopped asking why you didn't come. Richard closed his eyes. For one brief second, then opened them again. Noah's voice returned. Soft, careful, older than a child should sound. I waited for a long time. The video ended. Nobody moved. Evelyn stared at the dark screen. Her hands rested perfectly still in her lap. Richard looked down at the phone. 8 years. 8 years of funerals, memorials, grief, guilt, and silence. 8 years of believing his son was gone. 8 years of trusting the people sitting closest to him. Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. She had carried the key. She had protected the note. She had refused to hand over the evidence. Without her, the recording would still be hidden in a forgotten locker. Richard slowly placed the phone on the desk beside the music box. His fingers lingered there for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. The disappointment in his eyes hurt more than anger ever could. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to frighten everyone in the room. Call my attorney. The weeks that followed were quieter than anyone expected. There were no dramatic press conferences, no shouting matches, no public scenes on courthouse steps. Real consequences rarely arrived that way. They arrived through signatures, investigations, board meetings, and long conversations behind closed doors. The Whitmore board commissioned an independent review. The recordings from the phone were authenticated. Financial records were subpoenaed. Trust accounts were frozen. Attorneys spent hundreds of hours tracing money, documents, and decisions stretching back nearly a decade. Evelyn Whitmore resigned before the board could remove her. It didn't save her reputation, nor did it stop the civil lawsuits that followed. Several former trustees lost their positions. A law firm returned millions in fees tied to concealed guardianship arrangements. The charity accounts were audited. Names that had once appeared proudly on gala invitations now appeared in legal filings. Through it all, Richard said very little publicly. The man who had spent years speaking confidently to investors and reporters seemed to have discovered that some mistakes could only be answered with actions. Noah was found 3 states away working in a small repair shop outside Dayton, Ohio. The reunion wasn't cinematic. There were no perfect speeches. No instant forgiveness. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets while Richard struggled to find words that could cover 8 lost years. In the end, the thing that mattered most wasn't what Richard said. It was that he stayed. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Trust returned slowly. the way sunlight returns to a room after a storm. Maya never asked for a reward. When Richard's attorneys offered one, she shook her head. The boy needed help, she said. That's all. But Richard had finally learned something important. People who refuse to sell the truth are often the people who deserve protection the most. Tanya Brooks received more than a bonus check. Richard funded legal assistance that cleared years of housing issues caused by an abusive property management company. He made sure her employment came with benefits, health insurance, and a salary that respected the work she actually did. Maya earned a scholarship placed in her own name, but only after Richard asked permission. She insisted on one condition. Other children had to be included too, especially children nobody listened to. Richard agreed immediately. Months later, the mansion felt different. Not smaller, warmer. The grand staircase remained. The chandeliers still glittered. The photographs still lined the walls. But one picture had changed. The old photograph of Noah no longer sat bent and forgotten on a side table. It rested in a new frame inside the library. Beside it stood another photograph. Noah, older now, alive, standing beside his father. One autumn evening, rain tapped softly against the windows, just as it had on the night everything changed. Maya sat at the kitchen table finishing homework. Tanya stirred soup on the stove. Noah argued good-naturedly with a mechanic over the phone about a carburetor. The ordinary sounds of people living. Richard entered carrying a small box. He set it gently on the table. Inside rested the old flip phone. The battery had been replaced. The scratches remained. Maya looked up. "Why keep it?" she asked. Richard considered the question. Then he smiled faintly. "Because I spent years listening to the wrong people." He glanced at the phone, then at her. "And that phone reminds me who finally told the truth." Maya looked down at her notebook for a moment, then back at him. "It wasn't really me." Richard raised an eyebrow. "No." She shook her head. "I just listened when everybody else stopped." Richard fell silent. Not because he disagreed, because there was nothing left to add. Outside, the rain continued falling against the glass. Inside, the kitchen lights glowed warm across the table. The old photograph remained in its frame. The old phone remained on the shelf. And for the first time in a very long time, the people who had been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten no longer had to fight to be heard. The truth had finally outlasted the power that tried to bury it.